There are moments in history when time itself seems to tremble, when the ancient words of prophecy begin to align with the unfolding events of our own age. We live not in ordinary days, but in days charged with mystery, with shaking, and with destiny. The headlines of the world are not random. They are part of a larger tapestry, an ancient drama that began long ago and now approaches its final chapters. The ancients spoke of gods and idols, of powers and thrones that ruled over nations. In our modern age, we dismiss them as myth, as superstition, as relics of primitive imagination. Yet what if they were not myths? What if behind the idols of wood and stone stood real principalities, spiritual entities that once ruled the empires of old, and that even now seek to return, to reassert their dominion over the nations of the earth? We are living in the days when the ancient gods are rising again, clothed not in statues, but in ideologies, movements, obsessions, and cultural revolutions. They war against the faith of our fathers, against the covenant of God, against truth itself. They are as present in the screens that capture our eyes, in the systems that shape our children, and in the voices that cry from the streets, as they once were in the groves and altars of Cahn. But in every age, God raises up his own. In the days of Midian's oppression, he raised up a man from obscurity, from weakness, from hiding. Gideon, the least in his father's house, the smallest in his tribe, was called out to stand against the gods of his time. Yet before he could deliver Israel, before he could face the armies of Midian, he was commanded to tear down the altar of Baal in his own household. And when he obeyed, he was given a new name, Jerubbaal, the one who contends with Baal, the one who stands against the gods. That mystery now comes to us. For if these are the days when the gods are returning, then these are also the days when the children of God must rise as Jerubbaals, as those who will not bow, those who will contend, those who will bring down the altars. It is not by might, nor by power, but by the Spirit of the living God. On this appointed day, August 18, 2025, we are called to hear the prophetic mystery and the calling to rise, as Jerubbaal rose, to confront the powers, to stand against the darkness, and to bring down the gods that have enthroned themselves in our culture, in our families, and even in our own hearts. For the ancient battle is now our battle. The mantle of Jerubbaal is now given to you. In the story of Gideon, there is a mystery hidden in a name, and that name is Jerubbaal. Gideon was an ordinary man, hiding in fear, threshing wheat in a winepress so that the Midianites would not steal it. He was not a warrior, not a leader, not someone who appeared destined for greatness. Yet it was to him that the angel of the Lord appeared, calling him to rise up and deliver Israel from the hand of its enemies. The call was overwhelming, for Gideon saw himself as the least of his family, and his family as the least in the tribe. Yet God chose him, not because of his strength, but because of what he was about to do through him. But before Gideon could fight the battle of the Lord, before he could face the armies of Midian, there was another battle that had to be fought, a hidden battle, a deeper battle. God commanded him to destroy the altar of Baal that belonged to his father's house and the Asherah pole that stood beside it. Gideon's own family and village had bowed to the false gods of Cahn, and the oppression of Midian was the consequence of that idolatry. The first victory would not be against Midian, but against the gods. And so, under the cover of night, Gideon tore down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah pole. When the men of the town saw what had been done, they were enraged, for the altar of their God had been defied. They demanded that Gideon be brought out to be put to death. But his father, who had once erected that altar, now stood in defense of his son and said, "If Baal is truly a god, let him contend for himself." From that moment, Gideon was given a new naming Jerubbaal, meaning "let Baal contend," or the one who contends with Baal. That name was not a title of honor from men, but a prophetic mantle from God. It signified that Gideon's life, his calling, his destiny was to stand against the false gods of his age. He was no longer just Gideon, the fearful man in the winepress. He was Jerubbaal, the contender with Baal, the one who would not bow, the one through whom God would bring down the idols of the land. And the meaning goes deeper still, for in the mystery of Jerubbaal is revealed the pattern of God's people in every age. Before the great battles of history are won, before the armies of darkness are driven back, there must be a tearing down of the altars within. Before we can fight the world, we must confront the idols in our own lives. Jerubbaal is the picture of every believer who dares to stand against the gods of this age. Whether they manifest in addictions, pride, lust, or the cultural idols of wealth, power, and self. To bear the mantle of Jerubbaal is to refuse compromise, to defy the altars that enslave, and to walk in the power of God against the darkness. Gideon's name change was not just a change of identity, it was a declaration of war. And in the same way, when you are called by God, you are given a new name, a new identity, and a new destiny. To be a Jerubbaal in your own generation. From the beginning of time, the nations have been influenced not only by kings, rulers, and armies, but by powers that dwell beyond the visible realm. The scriptures reveal that what men called gods were not mere inventions of human imagination, but spiritual principalities, fallen beings, powers of darkness that took on the worship of mankind. Behind the idols of wood and stone, behind the names of Baal, Asherah, Moloch, and the gods of the nations, were forces that directed cultures, shaped civilizations, and demanded sacrifices. They were given thrones among the nations because the people turned their hearts away from the true God. These principalities once ruled openly. Ancient empires bowed to them, raised temples in their honor, and offered their sons and daughters in fire. But when the gospel entered the world, when the light of Messiah broke forth, the spell of the gods was broken. The altars fell, the temples became ruins, and the nations once captive to the idols were set free. Yet the mystery is this: if a people who have been delivered turn away from God, the ancient spirits return. What was once driven out seeks to come back, not as myth, but as influence, not as statues, but as ideologies, movements, and obsessions. We see this mystery in our own day. The gods have returned not in name perhaps, but in power. They rule not from carved altars, but from screens, media, institutions, and governments. The spirit of Baal, the God who led Israel to forsake the covenant, to mix the sacred with the profane, manifests now in a culture that turns from the word, that removes God from its foundations, that celebrates confusion and calls it progress. The spirit of Asherah, the goddess of sexual immorality and fertility rites, manifests in a world given over to lust, to the overturning of purity, to the corruption of marriage, and to the indoctrination of children in what is unclean. The spirit of Moloch, the dark power that demanded the sacrifice of children, manifests in the modern slaughter of the unborn, millions offered up not on altars of bronze, but in clinics justified by convenience, profit, and personal desire. These are not accidents of history, nor are they random cultural trends. They are the fingerprints of principalities returning to reclaim the nations that once knew God. They shape entertainment, they mold politics, they govern education, they even infiltrate religion. They feed on the turning of a people's heart away from the truth. And the more ground they gain, the more blatant their dominion becomes. And yet, as in the days of old, they are not all powerful. Their reign depends on the consent of men, on the silence of God's people, and on the neglect of the covenant. In the days of Gideon, Israel was crushed under the weight of Midian's oppression. The people hid in caves, their harvest stolen, their land stripped bare. It was in that moment of despair, when the nation felt abandoned, that God's call came. Not to the mighty, not to a warrior, not to a king, but to a man threshing wheat and hiding. Gideon was the least in his family, and his family was the least in the tribe. By every measure of the world, he was weak, insignificant, and unworthy. Yet the Lord appeared to him and called him a mighty man of valor. The call did not reflect what Gideon saw in himself. It reflected what God had ordained him to become. So it is in the days in which we now live. We stand in the end times, when darkness rises, when the gods of old return to claim nations, when truth is cast down in the streets. And who does God call to stand against such powers? Not the kings of the earth, not the rulers of empires, but the weak, the broken, the outcasts, the overlooked. He calls those who know they cannot win the battle in their own strength, for only such as these will rely fully on His Spirit. The mystery is that weakness itself becomes the vessel of power. Gideon's trembling, Gideon's doubts, Gideon's inadequacy, all of it was real, yet God chose him precisely because of it. For when the victory came, no man could boast that it was by human strength. And so, too, you who feel least qualified, least strong, holy, are the very ones He calls. In your weakness, His strength is revealed. In your insufficiency, His sufficiency is magnified. The end times are not a stage for the proud. They are a crucible for the humble, a battlefield where only those who lean on the Spirit of God can endure. Just as Gideon's army was reduced from thousands to only 300, so too in these days God is refining His people, stripping away reliance on numbers, wealth, or influence, until only those who trust Him completely remain. For the battle is not won by multitude, but by obedience. To be called in these times is to be called as Gideon was. To confront the powers not with sword alone, but with the breaking of idols, the tearing down of altars, and the sounding of the trumpet of God. It is to stand when others bow, to declare truth when the world embraces lies, to shine light in the gathering night. You may see yourself as insignificant, but heaven sees you as chosen. You may feel like Gideon in the winepress, hiding from the enemy, but God calls you Jerubbaal, the one who contends with the gods. When the call of God came to Gideon, it was not first a call to confront the Midianites on the battlefield, but to confront the idols in his own house. The people cried out to God for deliverance, yet in the midst of their cries, the altar of Baal stood in Gideon's father's yard, and the Asherah pole stood beside it. How could the nation be delivered while the gods of the land still held dominion in their very households? Before Gideon could rise as the deliverer of Israel, he was commanded to take his father's bull, to tear down the altar of Baal, to cut down the Asherah pole, and to build a new altar to the Lord upon the ruins. The battle for Israel's freedom would begin not with swords, but with obedience. So it is in every generation, and so it is now. The powers of darkness cannot be defeated in the open until they are overthrown in the secret places. The idols of a culture cannot fall until the idols within the people of God are first torn down. The altars must fall. They may not be made of stone, but they are no less real. An altar is anything that takes the place of God, anything that commands devotion, anything that consumes our time, our passion, our loyalty more than Him. For some, it is wealth; for others, lust; for others, pride or bitterness. For nations, it is the worship of self, the sacrifice of truth, and the elevation of sin as virtue. These altars stand high in our land, but they are also hidden within the heart. The mystery of Gideon is that before he confronted the armies of Midian, he had to confront the compromise of his own household. It is a prophetic picturing. The victory against the outside enemy depends on the cleansing within. We cannot call down the idols of the nation if we have not torn down the idols in our own lives. We cannot pray for revival if we are still bowing to altars of the flesh. The fire of God falls only upon altars consecrated to Him. And when Gideon obeyed, when the altar of Baal was cut down, the people of the town raged. They demanded his death. The tearing down of idols will never be welcomed by those who have built their lives upon them. There will be resistance. There will be anger. There will be persecution. But it is only in the courage to abide that deliverance begins. Gideon's act of obedience gave him his new name, Jerubbaal, the one who contends with Baal. The identity of the deliverer was sealed not on the battlefield, but at the altar. When the time came for Gideon to face the Midianites, he gathered a vast army. Over 30,000 men rallied to his side, stirred by the call to battle. By human measure, the odds were still against them, for the Midianites were countless, spread across the valley like locusts in number. Yet God looked upon Gideon's army and said it was too many. Not too few, but too many. For if Israel won with 30,000, they might boast in their strength, their strategy, their numbers. The glory would go to man, not to God. So the Lord began to reduce them. Those who were afraid were sent away. More than 20,000 departed. Still the army remained too large. At the waterside, God tested them, and only 300 were chosen. 300 against an enemy as vast as the sand on the seashore. This is the mystery of the remnant. God does not need the multitude. He does not depend on human odds, human strength, or human approval. He raises up the few, the willing, the faithful, to bring down the mighty. The battle belongs not to those who are strong in themselves, but to those who will trust fully in Him. Gideon's 300 armed not with weapons of great power, but with trumpets, jars, and torches, brought confusion upon the vast Midianite army until they turned their swords against one another and fled. The victory was the Lord's, but it came through the obedience of the few. So it is in these last days. The armies of darkness seem overwhelming. The gods of this age appear enthroned over nations, over media, over governments, over culture. The faithful are mocked, marginalized, silenced, and pressed down. To the eyes of flesh, it looks impossible, unwinnable. But God has never relied on numbers. He has never needed the approval of the majority. He seeks a remnant, those who will not bow, those who will not bend, those who will not surrender. The remnant is not measured by size, but by faithfulness. They may be few in number, but they are mighty in the spirit. Their strength is not in what they possess, but in whom they serve. The remnant stands when others fall. They shine when the world grows dark. They proclaim truth when the multitude embraces lies. They are Gideon's 300 in every generation. And this is the call upon you. Do not look to the multitude. Do not fear being in the minority. For often the majority is on the side of compromise, and the remnant is on the side of God. What he seeks is not the many, but the faithful few, for through them he will shake nations and overthrow strongholds. In your weakness, his power will be revealed. In your smallness, his greatness will shine. When Gideon and his 300 stood on the edge of the valley, they faced an army beyond counting. By human eyes, the battle was already lost. No strategy, no weapons, no human plan could overcome such a force. Yet that is precisely where God works. When man's strength fails, when man's numbers vanish, when every boast of the flesh is stripped away. For the victory was never meant to belong to Gideon, nor to Israel, but to the Lord alone. The 300 carried no swords of war into that first clash. Instead, they carried torches, jars, and trumpets. In the night, at the appointed signal, they broke their jars, lifted their torches high, sounded the trumpet, and shouted, "For the Lord and for Gideon!" In that moment, confusion fell upon the Midianite camp. Terror swept through the enemy. They turned their swords against one another, and the mighty army was broken by its own hand. The victory came not through the power of the 300, but through the Spirit of God moving through them. This is the eternal mystery of the battle. It is not the strong who prevail, but those who yield themselves to the Almighty. It is not the multitude that secures the victory, but the few who obey. The kingdom of God advances not by the might of nations, not by the wisdom of men, not by the weapons of the world, but by the unseen power of his Spirit. That same Spirit that shook the camp of Midian is the Spirit that now dwells in those who believe. And this is the lesson for the times in which we live. The darkness is real. The powers of the age are fierce. The gods of this generation claim thrones over nations, over culture, over hearts. To the eye of flesh, the faithful seem outnumbered, overwhelmed, defeated before the battle begins. But the truth remains, the outcome does not rest in human strength. The battle belongs to the Lord. It is his power, his Spirit, his hand that determines the victory. Our part is to stand, to obey, to lift our torches high, to sound the trumpet of truth, and to trust in the God of Gideon. When you face battles in your own life, remember this truth. It is not by your strength that chains are broken. It is not by your wisdom that the walls fall. It is not by your striving that the enemy flees. It is by his Spirit. When you feel overwhelmed, when you feel too weak, too small, too broken, that is when his power is ready to be revealed. For his strength is made perfect in weakness, and his glory shines brightest in the dark. As the mystery of Gideon and Jerubbaal unfolds, it leads us to a truth that must become the conclusion of this entire word. The battle we face is not of flesh and blood, but a spirit. The gods that once ruled the nations are rising again, disguised in modern garments, enthroned in culture, celebrated in media, and enthralled by the masses. Yet the pattern of God is unchanged. He does not call the mighty, he calls the weak. He does not need the multitude. He raises up the few. He does not rely on the strategies of men. He works through the power of his Spirit. And the end is always the same: the idols fall, the altars are shattered, and the glory belongs to the Lord alone. Gideon began in fear, hiding from the enemy, convinced of his insignificance. But God called him by another name, and that name, Jerubbaal, became the key to his destiny. He was no longer simply Gideon, son of Joash. He became the one who contended with Baal, the one who stood against the gods of the age. His story is not just history, it is prophecy, for the same calling rests now on us. In these end times, when the world bows once again to false gods, when the altars of Baal are rebuilt in modern form, when the spirit of Asherah corrupts the land, and when the spirit of Moloch demands the blood of the innocent, God is calling for Jerubbaals once again. But before the Jerubbaals rise on the battlefield, the altars must fall in the house. Before you confront the darkness around you, you must confront the darkness within you. What altars still stand in your life? What idols remain hidden in your heart? Tear them down. Break them apart. Build in their place an altar to the Lord, consecrated, holy, and untainted. For it is only when the altars fall that the true battle can be fought, and it is only then that the victory can come. And know this: you may feel outnumbered. You may feel small, overlooked, powerless against the tide of culture and the might of the world. But the God who reduced Gideon's army to 300 is the same God who reigns now. He is not searching for the multitude. He is searching for the faithful. He is looking for the remnant that will not bow. You do not need to be strong. You need only to be willing. You do not need to have the answers. You need only to trust. The Spirit of the Lord will do the rest. So rise in your calling. Take your place as Jerubbaal in your generation. Stand against the gods of this age. Shine light into the darkness. Speak truth to a world of lies, and refuse to bow no matter the cost. The days ahead may grow darker, but the light that shines in the darkness will not be overcome. For the battle belongs to the Lord, and because it belongs to Him, the victory is certain. The idols will fall, the powers will be broken, and the kingdom of God will stand forever.